Let's recall what former NBA referee Tim Donaghy says about how the 2003 to 2007 NBA betting scandal ended. According to Donaghy, after betting with his close friend Jack Kincannon during the prior 3 NBA seasons, he says he told Kincannon they had to stop betting in November of the 06-07 season. In Donaghy's book, he writes, quote, "In early November 2006, I just said, Jack, I don't feel comfortable doing this anymore. Let's quit. We're never going to do this again," unquote. He then adds, quote, "Jack and I placed our last bet on an NBA game in November of 2006, unquote. But then the mob visited him in December of 06 in the form of 2 Gambino crime family members who were threatening him and his family if he did not continue giving his picks. Because he was only betting out of fear, he was relieved when one of the so-called mobsters went into drug rehab on March 18, 2007. Donaghy was finally free from the grip of organized crime, and he thus stopped betting on his own games. In Donaghy's book, he writes, quote, "I placed my last bet on March 18, 2007, unquote. Again, he says, quote, "The last game I picked for Batista was on March 18, 2007, unquote. And lastly, he adds, quote, "It was the 1st of June, and I had not made a bet on any sporting event since March 18th, unquote. Got all that? Donaghy was dying to stop betting on games he officiated, but he had to keep the scheme going because the mob threatened him, and it was he, Tim Donaghy, who shut the scheme down in March of 2007. Well, here's what really happened. According to Donaghy's co-conspirators, including and especially Donaghy's best friend, Tommy Martino, who cooperated with the FBI, by the way, Donaghy complained that Jack Kincannon wasn't paying him, and thus Donaghy wanted to bet elsewhere. Martino shared Donaghy's frustrations and complaints about Kincannon with Martino's good friend, Jimmy Batista, a professional gambler. Though not friends, Donaghy and Batista actually knew each other from their high school years. According to Donaghy's best friend and government cooperator, Tommy Martino, he told the FBI, quote, "Donaghy complained that Kincannon was not giving him any money, so he wanted to start giving his picks to Batista." A meeting was set up at the Philadelphia International Marriott in December of 06 between the 3 men. This meeting between men who knew each other well for years is the event Donaghy has duped much of the public and many in the media into viewing as an organized crime extortion scheme. The mob actually consisted of Donaghy's best friend, Tommy Martino, and Martino's longtime childhood pal, Jimmy Batista, the gambler. And it was actually Donaghy who inspired the meeting because of his displeasure with Kincannon. Have people not been paying attention to the court cases and the criminal justice process? Here are the basics, especially in consideration of Donaghy's version of events. If you look at what the federal authorities, both the FBI and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Brooklyn, submitted to the court in their court filings, you see no mention of extortion and no mention of organized crime. If you pay attention to the press releases of the FBI or the Department of Justice, you see no mention of organized crime. I do this for a living. Please trust me when I tell you, the feds are not shy in hyping organized crime cases. But most importantly, neither Martino or Batista was charged with extortion, and the case was never treated as an organized crime extortion conspiracy. Part of the reason, of course, the feds didn't charge extortion was because government cooperator and Donaghy best friend, Tommy Martino, had this to say about that fateful meeting at the Philadelphia International Marriott. According to his 302, it says, quote, "Martino never heard Batista threaten Donaghy in any way. Martino had the impression that Donaghy wanted to provide the picks to Batista for Donaghy's own financial gain. Martino was not aware of Batista ever threatening Donaghy that he was going to hurt Donaghy or tell the NBA about the betting," unquote. Beyond that, if you look at what federal authorities had to say in court, they made this clear for anyone paying attention. They wrote, that Donaghy, quote, has never taken the position that he was anything other than a willing participant in the scheme with Batista and Martino, and before them with Jack Kincannon, unquote. And then you get to the sentencing judge. Judge Ammon had this to say. She said that, quote, Batista proposed an arrangement whereby Donaghy would provide picks on NBA games to Batista through Martino, unquote. And then when she sentenced Donaghy, she actually said that he was, quote unquote, more culpable than his two co-conspirators. Now that you realize the mob was not extorting Tim Donaghy in the 06-07 season, I hope people realize that starting roughly in 2019, Tommy Martino, Tim Donaghy's best friend and NBA betting scandal co-conspirator, started doing a promo tour for a film project he had. And Donaghy and Martino appeared in public and in the media together. I'd love to know how many people, especially in the media, realized that when they saw these two men together, Tommy Martino was one of the people Tim Donaghy had been saying for a decade was either a Gambino crime family member or associate who had threatened his life and that of his family. And beyond that, what the public doesn't know is that when the two men were pitching their project, Jimmy Batista was contacted to assist in the project and was offered a significant sum of money to assist promoting this film. And the person who reached out to him, you guessed it, Tim Donaghy, the person who has incessantly said Batista, like Martino, was a Gambino crime family member who threatened his life, his wife, and his kids. I can't understand why people have never grasped this is one colossal Donaghy scam. It has been unrelenting for a decade plus. Anyhow, let's get back to the end of the betting scandal. It's true that Batista goes into drug rehab in March of 2007. Unlike Donaghy's fact-star version of events, however, the scheme continued, just with another professional gambler, and his name was Pete Ruggieri. Ruggieri, who importantly also cooperated with federal authorities, takes over for Batista when Batista goes into drug rehab on March 18, 2007, and according to Ruggieri, the scandal only lasted a handful of games because betting lines were moving way too much, meaning the professional gamblers could not control the betting lines, which meant two things. First, their betting propositions were not going to be as successful as they otherwise would. And secondly, they're more likely for detection. Word on the street was out that Donaghy's games were fixed and they could no longer control the situation. So Pete Ruggieri, after X number of games, shuts the scheme down in April of 2007. Not the NBA, not the FBI, and certainly not, as he claims, Tim Donaghy. Pete Ruggieri, the professional gambler, shuts the scheme down. In fact, according to everybody involved, when Martino alerted Tim Donaghy to the end of the scam, Donaghy pleaded for one more game. Here is what Tommy Martino's FBI 302 form says about this. It says, quote, around March 2007, Batista went into drug rehab. At that point, Donaghy told Martino he wanted Martino to continue the scheme with Pete Ruggieri, unquote. And then it adds, quote, after Ruggieri decided to shut the scheme down, Donaghy pushed Martino to take one more game, unquote. This is also, by the way, if people had been paying attention, the plea deals for everyone other than Batista were through April. If you look at the plea deals for Donaghy and Martino, they're through April 2007. But for Batista, they're only through March of 2007 because he went into drug rehab. The point, of course, is though the scheme did not, as Tim Donaghy says in his book and says incessantly, end when Batista went in drug rehab. He was not under the thumb of organized crime, and he was not dying to end the scam. He not only continued after Batista went into drug rehab, he was upset when it was being ended by a professional gambler. There's one last point to add to all this Donaghy BS now that you know the mob didn't threaten him, and in fact, Tim Donaghy did not want to stop the hustle. Yes, Donaghy stopped betting with Jack and Kennan, but only for a brief period of time. According to the FBI, Tim Donaghy revived his relationship with Jack and Kennan in February of 2007, and thus Donaghy was actually betting with Batista and Kincannon simultaneously for the last 3 months of the NBA betting scandal. Needless to say, the full, fascinating, at times ridiculous, but importantly, evidence-based history of the 2003 to 2007 NBA betting scandal is presented in my best-selling book, Gaming the Game, the story behind the NBA betting scandal and the gambler who made it happen. Almost as importantly, related analysis and information, including specific examinations of numerous Donaghy claims, are posted on my website, which is SeanPatrickGriffin.net. Sean is spelled S-E-A-N, and Griffin is G-R-I-F-F-I-N. SeanPatrickGriffin.net. Thanks for your time.